The Vermont hills go quiet in October, not peaceful quiet, the other kind, the kind that comes when something has been waiting too long. A dirt road cuts through bare trees, 2 miles of nothing, then a cabin appears at the end of it, one-story hand-carved trim above the door, a porch worn smooth by one man, sitting in the same spot every evening for 12 years, a rocking chair, empty now. Inside, a boy kneels on the floor in the dark. 17, alone, a golden retriever pressed against his side. His hands are shaking. In front of him, a baseboard that shouldn't move, except it just did. And behind it, in a cedar-lined compartment, no one was supposed to find, 3 white envelopes sit in a perfect row, each one labeled in an old man's careful handwriting, each one addressed to a boy who was told his grandfather died before he was born. He reaches for the first one. Part 1. The last thing he packed. The cabin smelled like cedar and old wood and something Ethan couldn't name, something that felt impossibly like waiting. He stood in the doorway with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a golden retriever pressed against his left leg. The dog was warm, solid, the only solid thing Ethan had touched in 4 days. Buddy didn't go inside first, he waited for Ethan. That was the thing about Buddy, he always waited. 7 days earlier, Ethan Calloway had woken up to the sound of a garbage bag being dropped on his bedroom floor. Not set down, dropped. The way you drop something you don't care about. Dennis stood in the doorway, arms crossed. That particular expression on his face, the one he wore when he'd already decided something and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "You've got until noon," Dennis said. "Clothes and personal items. Leave the furniture." Ethan sat up slowly, 17 years old, still half asleep, still believing for approximately 3 more seconds that this was something other than what it was. "I'm sorry. You heard me." He had. He just needed a moment. Because the thing about being told to leave is that your brain doesn't process it like a normal sentence. It processes it like a language you've never studied, like someone handed you a document in a foreign alphabet and said, "Sign here." Dennis walked away. Down the hall, down the stairs, gone. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the garbage bag on the floor. Industrial size, black, the kind you use for yard waste. He thought about saying something, thought about going downstairs, finding his mother, looking her in the eye, asking what is happening, what are we doing, is this real? He thought about it for maybe 90 seconds. Then he started packing. His mother was in the kitchen. Of course she was. Miriam Calloway stood at the sink, washing a mug that was already clean. Her hands moved in slow circles. The water ran too hot, steam rising, and she didn't adjust it. "Mom." She didn't look up. "Mom." She turned off the water, dried her hands on the dish towel. Once, twice, a third time that wasn't necessary. Then she turned around and looked at Ethan for exactly 1 second before her eyes moved to the window above the sink. "You'll be okay," she said. "You're almost 18. I'm 17. You have a job. I have 12 hours a week at a gas station." She folded the dish towel, set it on the counter, picked it up, refolded it. Her mouth was pressed into a thin line. Her eyes were red at the edges, but her voice stayed flat, controlled, like she'd practiced this, like she'd been practicing this for a while. "Dennis thinks it's time," she said. "Dennis thinks." She didn't answer. Ethan looked at her, really looked, not at the flat voice or the careful hands or the window she was staring at instead of him. He looked at her face, and what he saw there wasn't cruelty. Worse, it was relief, small, hidden, but there, like a door she'd been holding shut for a long time, and someone had finally taken the weight off the other side. "I have $47, Ethan said. Miriam looked at the folded dish towel. Ethan picked up his duffel bag and walked through the living room, past the couch, past the television, past 11 years of a life that had always felt slightly borrowed, like he was staying in someone else's house and had just never been asked to leave, until now. Dennis was in the driveway, watching. Ethan opened the back of his truck, a 2002 Ford Ranger he'd bought with 14 months of gas station money, and threw the duffel bag in. Buddy was already in the passenger seat, had been since 6 that morning, like he knew, like he'd sensed it coming and decided quietly to position himself on the right side of the line. Dennis looked at the dog. Leave him. Ethan looked at Dennis. One beat. No. He got in the truck, turned the key, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Because if he looked, he might stop. And he couldn't stop. And he wasn't entirely sure yet whether that was strength or just forward momentum. Sometimes those things feel the same. Day 1. A Walmart parking lot on the edge of town. He leaned the seat back as far as it went, used a rolled sweatshirt for a pillow. Buddy arranged himself across the passenger seat with the philosophical efficiency of a dog who has accepted his circumstances and intends to be comfortable within them. Ethan woke up 4 times, once to a semi idling 2 rows over, once to a shopping cart rolling loose across the asphalt, once to a group of teenagers in the far corner of the lot laughing at something, the sound of it easy careless, landing somewhere in his chest like a splinter. The 4th time he woke up for no reason at all, just lay there, watching the sky go from black to gray to the particular color of early morning that isn't quite any color. Buddy shifted, found Ethan's hand with his nose, pressed into it, not asking for anything, just there. Day 2. Ethan drove to a public library 2 towns over, sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes with Buddy because dogs weren't allowed inside, used the outdoor Wi-Fi that barely worked, scrolled through job listings on his phone until the battery hit 9%. Nobody was hiring. Or nobody was hiring someone with no fixed address, no references except a gas station manager who might not remember his last name, no way to shower before an interview. He ate gas station crackers for dinner, split them with Buddy, who accepted his half with great dignity, and then looked at Ethan as if expecting a second course. There was no second course. Buddy accepted this with slightly less dignity. Day 3. The photograph of his father lived on the dashboard now. Ethan had moved it from the duffel bag on the first morning, needed it somewhere he could see it without having to look for it. Marcus Calloway, 25 years old in the photograph, dark hair, tired eyes, holding a baby in a yellow blanket, smiling the careful smile of someone who understands that happiness is a thing you can lose and is choosing to feel it anyway. On the back in handwriting, Ethan didn't recognize Marcus and Ethan. First week home, his father had died when Ethan was 3. Construction accident. That was everything Miriam had ever said about it. Construction accident. Past tense. Closed door. Don't ask again. His grandfather, George Calloway, had died before Ethan was born. Also according to Miriam. Also, apparently, not true. Day 4. Rest stop off, I-91, northern Vermont. Buddy was in the grass doing his business with great focus and concentration. Ethan leaned against the hood of the Ranger with his arms crossed and $47 in his pocket and approximately no plan. His phone rang. Number he didn't recognize. Vermont area code. He answered because he'd run out of reasons not to. Is this Ethan Calloway? Yeah. My name is Harlan Beck. I'm an attorney in Cloverfield, Vermont. I'm calling about the estate of George Calloway. Ethan was quiet for a moment. My grandfather died before I was born. A pause on the other end, longer than a pause should be. Mr. Calloway, George Calloway, passed away last October. He was 74 years old. He lived in Cloverfield for the past 22 years, and he named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate. Ethan looked at Buddy, who had finished his business and was now sitting in the grass, watching Ethan with the patient attention of a creature who understands that something important is happening. That's not possible. I understand this may come as a surprise. I want you to know I've been trying to reach you for 6 months. The number I had on file was your mother's. It's been disconnected. I eventually tracked your contact information through your high school's administrative office. 6 months. He was alive. Until last October, yes. My mother told me he died before I was born. Another pause. I know, Harlan Beck said. He told me. He came to my office every year to update his will. Always asked the same question. A beat. He asked whether I had been able to find you yet. Ethan couldn't speak. He looked at the photograph of his father on the dashboard, at the careful smile, at the baby in the yellow blanket. Something shifted inside his chest. Not dramatic, not a wave, more like a wall he'd been leaning against for 17 years. A wall he hadn't even known was holding him up, starting to move. What did he leave me? Ethan asked. A cabin, Harlan Beck said. He built it himself. The property is paid in full, no liens, no outstanding taxes. He made sure of that. Every January, he came into my office and paid the property taxes in advance. The lawyer paused, and his voice shifted slightly, the way people's voices do when they're repeating something that mattered. He said he wanted to make sure you didn't have to worry about that when you got there. When you got there. Not if. When. Ethan stood at a rest stop off I-91 with $47 and a golden retriever and a father's photograph on a dusty dashboard, and something he hadn't felt in 4 days, hadn't felt in a long time, maybe moved through him. Small, tentative, but real. Something that felt like maybe 5 hours north. The suburbs thinned into strip malls into farmland into nothing, just trees and 2-lane roads and the occasional barn set so far back from the highway it looked like a memory. Buddy sat up straight the whole drive, nose at the window gap, ears moving. He had opinions about Vermont air, apparently. Strong opinions. Vermont in April was mud season, and the last of the snow and bare trees starting to think about leaves. The sky was the color of old pewter. The roads were the color of the sky. Ethan crossed a narrow bridge over a creek he couldn't see the bottom of and saw the sign. Cloverfield, population 912. Small. Not charming small, not postcard small, just small. The kind of small where everyone knows which truck belongs to whom. Where the diner has had the same menu since 1987. Where a stranger's arrival is noticed before the stranger notices anything. Main Street, a hardware store, a diner, a post office that looked like it had been converted from a garden shed, a church with a marquee board that said prayer changes things in letters that had been rearranged recently enough that some of them were still slightly crooked, and at the end of the block, a general store, light on inside. Ethan parked in the only open spot. He looked at Buddy. Okay, he said. Buddy's tail moved once. Certain. The bell above the door rang when Ethan walked in. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her late 60s, gray hair in a loose braid over one shoulder, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was marking something in a ledger with a pencil the old way, and she looked up when the bell rang with the unhurried attention of someone who has time and intends to use it. She looked at Ethan, stopped. Her pencil went still. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did, something that had been waiting a long time to be used. You have your father's hands, she said. Not a question. Ethan stopped walking. How did you? Your knuckles, the way you hold your shoulders. Marcus stood exactly the same way. She set the pencil down, came around the counter. She moved steadily, deliberately, with the ease of a woman who had decided years ago not to waste motion on things that didn't matter. I'm Ruth Sutton. I own this store. I was your grandfather's closest friend for 20 years. Ethan looked at her. He talked about you, Ruth said. Every day, every single day for 14 years, never once stopped. She paused, looked at him straight. He left money at the store every month, said it was for when you came, for when you needed it after you arrived. She looked at the bag over his shoulder, at the dog at his heel, at the careful, exhausted steadiness of a 17-year-old who had been holding himself together through sheer refusal to do otherwise. "Have you eaten today?" Ethan thought about the gas station crackers. "Yeah." Ruth looked at him. "No, you haven't." She went to the back of the store and came out with a brown paper bag. Bread, peanut butter, 2 apples, a bottle of water, a box of crackers, actual crackers, not gas station crackers. She set the bag on the counter and pushed it toward him. "I can't. George paid for it, long time ago." She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. "Don't argue with a woman who's been keeping food aside for years, waiting for you to show up. It's disrespectful." Ethan picked up the bag. His hands, he noticed, were not completely steady. "What was he like?" he asked. Ruth leaned against the counter, looked at the window, like she was finding the right place to start. "He was a carpenter," she said. "Built houses for 40 years, good ones, the kind that last." She paused. "After your father died, he came apart. A couple of years of drinking, bad years, but he pulled himself out, got sober, stayed sober, and never once talked about those years without also talking about what came after." She looked at Ethan. "He built that cabin with his own hands, every nail, every board, every joint. He said," she paused again, the way people do when they're being careful with words that meant something. "He said if he couldn't bring you to the cabin, he'd make sure it was ready for the day you found your way." Ethan stood in the middle of the store. His eyes burned. He pressed the inside of his cheek between his teeth and held it together. Ruth didn't move toward him, didn't reach out, just looked at him with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has been expecting this moment and is in no rush to get through it. "Do you know where it is?" Ethan asked. 2 miles up Old Creek Road, left fork at the split, mailbox with no name on it. She wrote the directions on a piece of paper anyway, slid it across the counter. "Go. You'll want to see it before dark." The road went from asphalt to gravel to dirt. Trees closed in on both sides until the sky was just a narrow gray strip overhead. Ethan drove slowly. The Ranger's headlights barely made a dent in the early evening shadow. Then the road opened up, and there it was. 1 story, covered porch across the front, weathered roof, not damaged, weathered the way things get when they've been standing long enough to earn it. And even from the driveway, even in the fading light, he could see the work in it, the care in it. The door frame had hand-carved trim along the top, leaves, branches, cut into the wood by someone who had taken weeks, maybe months, on something most people wouldn't even notice. Ethan sat in the truck for a moment. Buddy was already at the door looking at him, waiting. Harlan Beck had told him where to find the key, a lockbox on the porch post, combination 1947, George's birth year. The key was old, heavy brass. It sat in Ethan's palm like something that had been waiting for a specific hand. The door swung open without a sound. The hinges were oiled. Someone had been caring for this place, keeping it ready. Inside, cedar and dust and the faint ghost of wood shavings. A small living room with a stone fireplace. A kitchen with a window over the sink. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. Everything built from the same warm tone, wood plane smooth, fitted with a precision that made Ethan stop in the kitchen and just run his hand along the counter. Every shelf was level. Every drawer slid without catching. Nothing creaked. He opened cabinets. He tested faucets. The kitchen sink ran brown for 10 seconds and then ran clear. He stood at the bedroom window and looked out at the backyard, mostly weeds, and 1 enormous oak tree with a trunk thick enough to put your arms around. Then he found the broom. He didn't plan to. He opened the hall closet, looking for something, and found the broom standing in the corner, and then he just started sweeping, floor by floor, room by room. The dust came up in soft clouds and settled, and he swept it out through the front door. He wiped the counters, checked the toilet, found a mouse hole in the corner of the bedroom closet, and stuffed a piece of old cloth into it as a temporary fix. Buddy followed him from room to room, interested in everything, nose investigating every corner, every baseboard, every dark space under the kitchen cabinets. Ethan made a peanut butter sandwich from Ruth's paper bag and ate it sitting on the floor of the living room. There was no furniture except one wooden chair by the fireplace and a small table beside it. He sat with his back against the wall, knees pulled up, sandwich in one hand, looking at the room. The fireplace was cold. The last light was coming through the kitchen window at a low angle, turning everything the color of old honey. That's when Buddy stopped. He had been moving around the room the way he always moved, curious, thorough nose to the ground. But now he stopped at the baseboard along the wall beside the fireplace, sat down, looked at Ethan, then pressed his nose deliberately with the focused intention of a dog who has found something worth finding into the lower edge of the baseboard. Ethan looked at him, looked at the baseboard. It was the same wood as everything else, same finish, same color, but there was a gap at the top, not from settling, not from warping. The gap was exactly the same width all the way across. Uniform, intentional. Ethan set down the sandwich, got on his knees, pressed the left end. Nothing. Pressed the right end. The baseboard slid sideways on hidden tracks. Smooth, silent, the kind of smooth that comes from somebody spending a very long time getting it exactly right. Behind it, a compartment, cedar-lined, 8 inches deep, 2 feet wide, 3 white envelopes, sitting in a row like they'd been placed there yesterday, each one labeled in neat, careful handwriting, the handwriting of someone who had thought about each letter before he made it. Ethan, age 6, Ethan, age 7, Ethan, age 8. Ethan's hands were trembling. He picked up the first envelope, worked his thumb under the seal. A birthday card. Simple. A drawing of a cake on the front, hand-drawn, not printed. Someone had drawn it themselves. The lines were slightly uneven, the frosting suggested, rather than detailed. The work of a man who was better with wood than with pencils, but who had tried anyway. He opened it. Happy birthday, Ethan. I hope you're well. I sent a card to your mother's house this year, the same as last year and the year before. It came back like the others, so I'm keeping this one here instead, where I know it will be safe. You are 6 years old today. I have thought about you every single day of those 6 years. Your father would be so proud of the boy you're becoming, even though I haven't been allowed to see it. I love you, Ethan. I will keep writing these until one of them reaches you. Grandpa George. Ethan sat on the floor of the cabin his grandfather had built and fell apart, not quietly, not with any kind of composure. He pulled his knees to his chest and pressed the birthday card against his sternum and cried until his ribs ached, until the honey-colored light through the window turned orange, until the room went dim. Buddy crawled into his lap, all 30 pounds of him, all that warm, impossible weight. He turned in a circle, one circle just enough, and then settled against Ethan's chest like that was where he'd always meant to be. Ethan held him. He had been loved. His whole life, he had been loved by someone he never got the chance to know. When he could move again, he opened the second envelope, thicker than the first. Birthday card with balloons on the front, George's handwriting inside, same steadiness, same patience. Happy birthday, Ethan. You're 7 today. I drove past your mother's house last week. I parked across the street and sat there for about an hour. I could see your bedroom light on. I wanted to walk up and knock on the door more than I have ever wanted anything in my life, but the restraining order says I can't come within 200 feet. So I sat in the truck and watched your light until it went off. Then I drove home and wrote you this card. You are 7 years old and you don't know I exist, and that is the hardest thing I have ever carried. I love you. I will keep trying. Grandpa George. 200 feet. He'd sat in his truck, 200 feet away, watching a light. Ethan thought about all the nights he'd left his bedroom light on too long, reading, or just lying there, or staring at the ceiling, thinking about nothing in particular, all those ordinary nights. And somewhere out there in the dark, a truck, an old man, watching. Not close enough to knock, not close enough to call out, just close enough to see a light and know the boy was still there. The third envelope. 8th birthday. Happy birthday, Ethan. I filed a petition last month for visitation rights. The judge denied it. Your mother's lawyer argued I was an unfit influence. I've been sober for 3 years now. 3 years, 2 months, and 4 days to be exact. But the things I did before that, the 2 years after your father died, when I was not myself and did not act like myself, those things followed me into that courtroom and sat down beside me, and the judge saw them and made his decision. I'm going to keep trying. I will never stop trying. I love you. Grandpa George. 3 cards. 3 years of trying to reach a boy who didn't know he existed. 3 years of sitting in trucks in the dark and mailing cards that came back and standing in courtrooms and losing, and keeping the cards anyway, keeping them in a cedar-lined compartment behind a sliding baseboard in a cabin he'd built himself, keeping them somewhere safe, somewhere she couldn't reach, because the alternative was giving up, and George Calloway did not give up. Ethan put the cards back in their envelopes and sat against the wall for a long time. Buddy was warm against his side. Outside the window, the trees were just shapes now. The sky was dark. Somewhere out there was a creek he'd crossed, it coming in, and he could hear it faintly. Water over stone. Steady and patient, he thought about the gap in the baseboard. Uniform, the same width all the way across. He stood up, walked the perimeter of the living room, pressed baseboards, knocked on walls, ran his fingers along seams. He went to the kitchen and opened cabinets, pulled drawers out, checked behind shelves. George had been a carpenter for 40 years. He knew how to make things invisible. He'd built this cabin across 15 years of trying to reach one person, and he hadn't used a single inch of it carelessly. There were more. There had to be more, and Ethan was going to find all of it. He got back on his hands and knees and started at the kitchen sink. The panel underneath was a single piece of wood, same grain as every other panel in the kitchen, same finish. But when he pressed along the bottom edge, he felt something. A give, barely there, like a breath. He pressed harder. The panel tilted forward on a hidden hinge and swung down. Inside the space behind the plumbing, 6 more envelopes, tied with a piece of kitchen string, and something else, a small wooden box the size of a paperback book. He untied the string, ages 9 through 14, 6 more years. He opened them in order, sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet. The birthday cards were the same simple designs, George's handwriting, but tucked behind each card were bills, 20s and 50s folded once, 6 years of birthday money, money he'd never received. He counted it, $380, sent separately from the money George left with Ruth, 2 different acts of the same intention. Ruth's supply was for when Ethan arrived, practical and immediate. This money was symbolic, personal, the kind a grandfather puts in a birthday card, because that's what grandfathers do, and George was determined to do it even if the cards never arrived. The card for age 12 was longer than the others. I send a card to your mother's house every year. They come back. I keep them here instead. I don't know if you'll ever see these, Ethan, but I write them anyway, because the alternative is doing nothing, and I made a promise to your father that I would never do nothing. Ethan set that card down on the floor in front of him and looked at it for a long time. A promise to your father. He picked up the wooden box, heavier than it looked. The wood was sanded smooth, really smooth, the way wood gets when someone has spent serious time on it. A tiny brass clasp on the front. He opened it. A music box mechanism, metal comb and cylinder fitted into a hollowed space precisely, like a puzzle piece that had been made for exactly this hollow. He turned the small brass key on the side. A lullaby. He didn't recognize the tune. Slow and gentle and slightly uneven in the way that handmade things are uneven. Not imperfect, just human. The sound of something made by hands, not machines. On the inside of the lid, 5 words burned into the wood in small, careful letters. I made this for you. Ethan sat on the kitchen floor and held the music box and let it play until it wound down. Then he wound it again. He sat there as the cabin settled around him, as the dark outside went fully dark, as the sound of the creek came and went on the night air. He sat there and listened to a lullaby a 70-something-year-old carpenter had made for a grandson he'd never gotten to hold again. He was still sitting there when he heard tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the kitchen window. An engine cut off. A car door. Ethan went to the front window. Ruth Sutton was climbing the porch steps with a casserole dish in one hand and a paper bag in the other. She moved like someone who had done this before or had always planned to. He opened the door. Didn't want to come by too early, Ruth said. Figured you'd need the evening. She held up the casserole dish. Chicken and rice. Nothing fancy. Ethan took the dish. It was warm. Actually warm, the kind that meant she'd made it recently and driven carefully. Thank you. Ruth came inside and looked around the cabin the way you look at a room you know well. Unhurried, taking stock. She set the paper bag on the kitchen counter, looked at the music box still sitting on the floor, at the open envelopes arranged carefully beside it. She didn't say anything about them. Milk, eggs, coffee, she said, unpacking the bag. And bread. Real bread, not that foam they sell at the gas station. She looked at Buddy, who had come to sit beside her, with polite but intense interest. She produced a dog biscuit from her coat pocket, placed it on the floor, and Buddy accepted it with solemn gratitude. Ethan watched this happen. Were you expecting to need that? He asked. Ruth looked at him over her reading glasses. I've been keeping dog biscuits in my coat pocket for months, she said. In case you had a dog. A pause. George always said you'd have a dog. Don't ask me how he knew. They sat at the small table by the fireplace, Ruth on the wooden chair, Ethan on the floor with his back against the wall, the same spot where he'd been sitting when Buddy found the baseboard. Ruth talked. Ethan ate the chicken and rice, and it was the best thing he'd tasted in days. After your father died, George came apart, Ruth said. He'd been a strong man his whole life. 40 years of building things in every kind of weather, never missed a day. But losing a child is different. It breaks you in a place nobody can get to. She paused. 2 years of drinking. Bad years. I won't lie to you about that. He wasn't himself. What changed? Ruth looked at the cold fireplace. One morning he showed up at my store at 6 a.m., sober, shaved, clean clothes for the first time in months. He stood there and looked at me and said, She stopped, pressed her lips together, continued. He said, I made a promise to my son, and I intend to keep it. What promise? To take care of you. Ruth looked at Ethan. He couldn't get to you. Your mother blocked every attempt. The lawyer, the court, the letters, all of it. And those 2 years of drinking gave her exactly what she needed to make it stick. She paused. So he built instead. He said if he couldn't bring you here, he'd build a place worth coming to. Ruth looked around the room. At the shelves, the hearth, the carved trim visible through the front door. He worked on this cabin every day, sun up to dark most days, for 15 years. 15 years. Ethan looked down at his hands, his father's hands, according to Ruth, his grandfather's hands, probably if he thought about it, 3 generations of men who built things when the world stopped making sense. He looked at the baseboard across the room, the one Buddy had found, back in its place now, the gap invisible unless you knew to look. I should fix that porch railing, Ethan said. Ruth looked at him. Right now, it needs doing. Ruth made a sound that was not quite a laugh, not quite, but close. Ethan found the toolbox in the hall closet. Claw hammer, set of chisels, hand plane, tape measure, level, everything clean, everything sharp, organized in a way that told him more about George Calloway than any photograph could. Each tool had its place. Each blade was oiled. Nothing wasted, nothing careless. A man's entire philosophy laid out in a wooden box. He took the toolbox outside, worked on the railing until the light was fully gone, checked the posts, found one soft at the base he'd need to replace it properly, but for now, he braced it. He went back inside and fixed the drip in the kitchen faucet, found a replacement washer in a glass jar on the closet shelf, organized by size and type, every one of them labeled in George's handwriting. Ruth watched from the chair by the fireplace. "You're handy," she said. "I fix things at home." He tightened the faucet handle, turned the water on. No drip. The washing machine, the furnace, Dennis never bothered. Your father was the same way. Ruth looked at the fireplace. And George, it runs in the family. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Ruth left around 8. She told him to come by the store any time. Ethan stood on the porch he'd just repaired, and watched her taillights disappear down the dirt road. Then he went inside. He slept on the bedroom floor, on top of his duffel bag jacket pulled over him. Buddy curled against his knees. He was stiff and cold when he woke up, but he'd slept the whole night. No waking, no trucks idling, no footsteps outside, just dark and quiet, and the sound of the creek, the first real sleep in days. He made coffee with Ruth's supplies and stood at the kitchen window, watching the oak tree's shadow shorten as the sun came up. The tree was enormous, old. It had been here long before George arrived, would be here long after. He drank his coffee, looked at the toolbox still on the counter where he'd left it, looked at the walls, thought about a man who had spent 15 years hiding something in them. Buddy sat beside him, looking out the window too, at the oak tree, at the road, at whatever dogs look at when they're looking at something. "Okay," Ethan said. Buddy's tail moved. "Let's find the rest of it." Part 2, What the Walls Were Hiding. The second morning in the cabin started the same way the first one ended, quietly, with coffee, with Buddy. Ethan stood at the kitchen window and watched the oak tree. The shadow was shorter than yesterday, the sun a little higher, small proof that time was still moving even when it felt like it had stopped. He'd slept on the floor again, would sleep on the floor again tonight. That was fine. The floor was solid. The floor didn't shift under him or change its mind. He drank his coffee and thought about the walls. A man who spent 40 years as a carpenter doesn't hide things carelessly. He plans, he measures, he thinks 3 moves ahead. The baseboard that was the first one, under the kitchen sink the second, but George had 15 years, and a cabin with 4 rooms, and the patience of a man who had decided that patience was the only tool he had left. There were more. Ethan set down the cup. "Okay," he said. Buddy was already standing, already looking at him with that particular golden retriever expression that means I have been ready for the past 20 minutes. "What took you so long?" He started in the bedroom, smallest room in the cabin, closet with a hanging rod, one window facing the backyard, bare walls, same warm-toned wood as everywhere else. He went over every surface, floorboards, window frame, closet walls. He knocked on the drywall and listened for hollow spots, pressed along every baseboard, checked the windowsill for hidden hinges. Nothing, until the wall opposite the window. He almost missed it. It looked exactly like every other wall, same wood, same finish, same careful construction. But when he put his palm flat against it and pushed, just tested it, the way you test ice before you step on it, he felt it. Not movement, just the suggestion of movement, the memory of movement. He worked his fingers around the edge until he found it, a small wooden button recessed into the trim at the bottom corner, barely visible, flush with the surface, the kind of thing you could run your hand across 100 times and never notice. He pressed it. The panel swung inward, smooth and silent, because of course it did. Behind it, a space deeper than the others, almost 2 feet deep. Dark inside, the cedar smell stronger here, more concentrated, like something had been waiting in it for a very long time. 2 stacks of envelopes, tied with kitchen string the same kind as before. He pulled them out and sat on the bedroom floor. First stack, white envelopes, each one addressed in George's handwriting, but not to Ethan, to Miriam Calloway. His mother's name, his mother's address. Every single one stamped "Return to sender," not stamped by the post office, stamped by hand. The ink was red. The handwriting on the stamp was his mother's. He recognized it. He'd seen it on school forms, on birthday cards she signed with a single M, on the one letter she'd ever written him the summer he went to camp at 13, the letter that said mostly practical things and very little else. That handwriting, on every envelope, every single one, 15 letters, one for every year. He set them aside. Second stack, one envelope, older than the rest. The paper was soft at the edges, slightly yellowed, like something that had been handled carefully many times and then put away just as carefully. The handwriting on the front was different, faster, less controlled, written by someone younger, someone who hadn't yet learned to slow down, addressed to Dad. Ethan looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened the first stack. The letters to Miriam were not long. George was not a man who used extra words. The first letter was half a page. Miriam, I am sober. I have been sober for 8 months and I intend to stay sober. I am asking you please to let me see my grandson. I will come to your house. I will meet in a public place. I will agree to whatever conditions you set. He is my son's boy. Marcus would want him to know me. Please. Second letter, a year later. Miriam, I filed the paperwork. My lawyer says we have a real case. I am not trying to take Ethan from you. I am asking for one afternoon a month. That is all I am asking for. Sixth letter, 5 years in. Miriam, I know you open these before you send them back. The seal is always broken. I don't understand what I have done that is so terrible you would keep a man from knowing his only grandson. Marcus is gone. Ethan is all I have left of him. Please. Ethan set that one down, picked it back up, read it again. The seal is always broken. She read them. Every one. She opened them, read them, and sent them back. He sat with that for a while, the weight of it. Not just that she'd blocked George, he'd known that on some level since the first birthday card, but that she'd read every word, every plea, every mention of Marcus's name, and still sealed them back up and stamped them and dropped them in a mailbox. 15 times. 12th letter. Miriam, I've stopped hiring lawyers. I can't afford it anymore, and it doesn't work. But I want you to know something. I haven't stopped. I will never stop. I'm building something for Ethan. When he's old enough, he'll find it. I believe that. I have to believe that. Ethan refolded the 12th letter. His hands were steady, which surprised him. He felt like they shouldn't be. He felt like something should be shaking. But there was nothing left to shake out of him. He'd done that last night on this floor with Buddy on his chest. Whatever was loose in him had already come free. What was left was something harder, something that just wanted to understand. He picked up the second stack, the one envelope, the old paper, the young handwriting. He turned it over, looked at Dad on the front. One word, the letters slightly uneven, written by someone in a hurry or in emotion or both. He opened it. Dad, I know you don't want me taking this job. I know you think the site is unsafe and the foreman cuts corners, and you're probably right about both of those things. But your surgery is in 6 weeks and the insurance gap is $14,000, and I am not going to sit here and let you skip it again. You raised me alone after Mom left. 12 years, just the two of us. You taught me how to read a level and set a foundation and cut a mortise joint and about 1,000 other things I use every single day. You gave me everything you had and never once complained about it. So let me do this. Let me take care of you for once in my life. I'll be careful. I promise you I will be careful. But if something happens, which it won't take care of Ethan for me, take care of my boy. He's only 3 and he won't remember much, but make sure he knows. Make sure he knows he was loved. Promise me, Dad. Please, promise me. Marcus. Written the week before the scaffold collapse. Ethan read it twice. Then he set it down on the floor in front of him, very carefully, like it was something that could break. Marcus Calloway, 25 years old, standing at a job site he didn't fully trust, making a choice he didn't fully want to make, because $14,000, because of surgery, because you raised me alone for 12 years and I owe you more than I can ever repay, because, the word that explains everything and excuses nothing and just sits there being true. Ethan pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. Buddy moved across the room and settled beside him, not on his lap this time, just beside him, close enough to feel present in the way that mattered, the way Buddy always was, just there. He didn't hear Ruth come in. He didn't hear her truck on the road or her boots on the porch or the front door, but at some point she was in the bedroom doorway, looking at him on the floor with the open envelopes around him and Marcus's letter in his hand. She looked at the letter, at his face. Then she came and sat on the floor beside him, not across from him, beside him, close enough that her shoulder was almost touching his. She didn't say anything, not yet. After a while, Ethan held out the letter. Ruth put on her reading glasses. Read it slowly, the way you read something that deserves to be read slowly. Then she took off her glasses and held them in her lap. He never showed me this, she said. It was in the wall. I know. A pause. George carried Marcus's death every day of his life, every single day. He truly believed that Marcus died because of him. His heart, his surgery, his insurance. Was he wrong? Ruth was quiet for a moment. Marcus made his own choice, she said. He was 25 years old, and he made a grown man's choice. But guilt doesn't care about that. Guilt finds the version of the story where everything is your fault, and it moves in, and it doesn't leave. Ethan looked at the letter on the floor. Tell me about my father, he said. Ruth leaned her head back against the wall. He was funny, she said. People don't always say that first, but it's true. He had this. He could find the ridiculous thing in any situation, make you laugh when you didn't expect to. She paused. He was also stubborn as a fence post when he thought he was right, which was most of the time. Another pause. He adored you. From the day you were born. George told me he said Marcus called him from the hospital at 2 a.m. Couldn't wait. Just had to tell somebody. She smiled. Something small and private. He said Marcus sounded like he'd invented babies, like nobody had ever done this before. Ethan looked out the bedroom window at the oak tree. Dark hair, tired eyes, the careful smile of someone who knew happiness was fragile and was choosing it anyway. Why did she do it? Ethan said. Not a question exactly, more like something said out loud that had been in his head for a long time. Ruth didn't answer immediately. I don't know all of it, she said. George had theories. I had theories. The truth is losing someone at 25 with a 3-year-old and a father-in-law who was in a bad way for a couple of years. She stopped. Some people get bigger after grief. They break open and something larger comes out. And some people get smaller. They pull in, close every door they can find. She looked at Ethan. Your mother got smaller. Ethan folded Marcus's letter back along its original creases, carefully, following the same lines Marcus had made. She read every letter George sent, he said. Ruth looked at him. George figured that out too, she said quietly. Said he could tell from the way the envelopes came back, the seals. She paused. He kept writing anyway. They went outside. Not because there was anything to do outside, specifically, just because the bedroom had gotten heavy and the air in it needed to be replaced with different air. They sat on the porch steps. The morning was cool, still, a crow somewhere in the oak tree making periodic announcements to no one. A mail truck came around the bend in the road and slowed at the empty mailbox. The driver was an older man, gray beard, faded blue cap. He leaned out the window and looked at Ethan with the uncomplicated curiosity of someone who knows everyone in a town of 900 and has therefore noticed someone new. "You must be the grandson," he said. "Word travels. Small town." He rested his arm on the door. "Your grandfather sat on this porch every single evening. Rain, snow, didn't matter. I drove past here 6 days a week for 12 years, and he was always there, waved every time." He looked at the empty chair by the front door. "One time I stopped and asked him what he was doing out here by himself every night. You know what he said?" Ethan shook his head. "Said he was waiting." The mail carrier looked at Ethan steadily. "Said she'll come. One day she'll come." He nodded once, put the truck in gear, and drove on. Ethan watched the truck disappear around the bend. "He waited for me every evening for 12 years. Ruth put her hand on his arm, just for a second, then took it away. "Come on," she said. "Show me what else he left." They went back inside. Ethan led her to the bedroom panel, showed her the button in the trim. She pressed it herself, watched the panel swing inward, made a sound low in her throat. "That's George," she said. "He never did anything the simple way if there was a better way to do it." "There might be more," Ethan said. "I'd bet on it." They split up. Ruth took the kitchen, every cabinet, every panel, every drawer pulled out and checked behind. Ethan took the living room again, more systematically this time, knocking every foot of wall, listening for the difference between solid and hollow. The hearth stopped him. Flat stones fitted together without mortar, every one placed with the same precision George brought to everything, making them look like a single surface. Ethan knelt and ran his fingers along the edges. Solid, tight. One stone near the base sat slightly higher than the others, not by much, a fraction of an inch. He pressed it. Nothing. Pressed it and pushed sideways. It shifted. He worked it free and set it aside. Underneath, a small brass handle set flush into the subfloor. He pulled. A section of floorboard lifted on hidden hinges. The compartment was the size of a shoebox. Inside, a thick manila envelope and a wooden box, darker than the music box, heavier. Ruth, she came from the kitchen, looked at the open floor. "Lord," she said under her breath, like a prayer or something close to it. The manila envelope first, heavy, filled with papers that had been folded and refolded many times. He spread them on the floor. Court documents, printed on heavy paper, official stamps, case numbers from the county court. The first set, a petition filed in the matter of visitation rights for George R. Calloway, petitioner, regarding the minor child, Ethan M. Calloway. George had filed when Ethan was 6. He'd attached character references, 3 of them from Ruth, from his doctor, from a former client. He'd included proof of 18 months of sobriety, a letter from his AA sponsor, 2 pages handwritten. The response from Miriam's lawyer was stapled behind it, 4 pages, alleging George was an unfit influence, history of alcohol abuse, unstable living conditions, and a sworn statement from Dennis Howell. Ethan read it again. Dennis Howell signing under penalty of perjury, swearing before the court that George Calloway had appeared at their residence in an intoxicated state and made verbal threats against Miriam and her household. Dated October 2015. Ethan looked up. Ruth. She was already beside him, reading over his shoulder. "This is from 2015, Ethan said. "Yes." George had been sober since 2012. 3 years and 2 months by then, Ruth said. Her voice was even, very deliberately even. "I know because I drove him to his AA meetings for the first year, every Thursday, without fail. And I know because I watched him every day in that store. I would have known if he'd slipped." "He lied," Ethan said. "Dennis lied to a judge." Ruth said nothing. She reached down and picked up the sworn statement. "Read every word of it. Set it back down." "George knew," she said. "He knew this statement wasn't true. He kept the papers, all of it, because he knew. He was building a record in case it ever mattered. Ethan looked at the document. Dennis Howell, standing in Ethan's bedroom doorway with his arms crossed. You've got until noon. Standing on this porch talking about property values like a man who had done his research, like a man who had been thinking about this cabin for a while. He knew. He'd known about the cabin, read one of George's return letters probably, or found out through some other means, knew about the property, knew about the estate, and had come prepared. Dennis Howell had lied to a judge to take George's last chance at seeing his grandson, and now he wanted the cabin too. Ethan sat very still for a moment. Then he opened the wooden box. Savings bonds. He lifted them out one at a time. Heavy paper, official seals, serial numbers printed in the careful ink of government documents, each one issued in the name of Ethan M. Calloway. 15 of them, one per year, starting 2009 when Ethan was 2 years old and running straight through to 2024. At the bottom of the box, a folded piece of lined paper, George's handwriting. He'd added up the values himself, pencil calculations in the margin. $52,000. Ethan counted the bonds, checked the math. $52,000, saved one bond at a time, by a man who lived alone in a cabin he built himself, who cut his own firewood, who, according to Ruth, hadn't replaced his truck since 2008 and wore the same 3 flannel shirts for a decade. One bond a year, every year, for 16 years. Ruth was sitting beside him on the floor now, neither of them speaking. The documents spread between them like a map of 15 years of love that had nowhere to go. He lived on almost nothing, Ethan said. He did, Ruth said. So that Ethan gestured at the bonds, couldn't finish the sentence. So that you wouldn't have to, Ruth said. Under the bonds, pressed flat against the bottom of the box, was one more envelope, different from the others, thicker paper, not a birthday card envelope, not a letter envelope, just an envelope. No name on the front, no address, just George's handwriting, slower than the cards, less certain. The handwriting of someone writing something important and taking the time to get each word right. Ethan opened it. Several pages, lined paper from a legal pad. He unfolded them. Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, you found the cabin, and you found what I left for you. I want to explain the hiding. Why I put everything in the walls instead of a bank account or a lawyer's safe. The answer is simple. She can't take what's hidden in the walls of a house she'll never visit. Your mother returned my letters. She kept the birthday money I sent. I knew she would, which is why I also left separate money with Ruth, something immediate for when you first arrived. But the money in the cards was different. That was yours in the way birthday money is supposed to be yours, personal, and I sent it anyway, even knowing she might keep it, because some gestures have to be made regardless of whether they arrive. She took every legal option I had and turned it against me in court. But she never came here. She didn't know this cabin existed, and she never will unless you decide to tell her. I need to tell you about your father. Marcus died on April 14th. He was 25 years old. He took a job on a construction site to pay for my heart surgery because my insurance wouldn't cover the full cost and I didn't have the money. I told him not to go. I told him the site wasn't safe. I told him I would rather die on my kitchen floor than let him go up on a scaffold he didn't trust. He went anyway. He said, "Let me take care of you for once, Dad." 3 weeks later, the scaffold gave out and he was gone, and I have carried that every single day since. Your father died because of my heart, because of my surgery, because of me. I got sober because I made him a promise. He asked me to take care of you. That is the only promise I have left, and I intend to keep it, even after I'm gone. The bonds are yours. The cabin is yours. Everything I built and saved for 15 years, I built and saved for you. Ethan stopped reading, breathed, kept going. You have your father's hands, Ethan. I know that even though I never got to see you hold a tool, Ruth told me things about you when she could find anything out. She said you fix things. She said you're quiet and you figure things out on your own and you don't wait for someone to tell you how. That's Marcus. That is exactly who Marcus was. Whatever they've told you about me, know this. I loved you every single day. I loved you when you were born, and I held you and you grabbed my fingers, and I laughed out loud because you were so strong and so small and so completely yourself. I loved you when the court said no. I loved you when I was drinking and couldn't love myself. I loved you when I built this cabin and when I hid these letters in the walls. I love you now. Wherever I am, I love you now. Your grandfather, George. Ethan didn't move for a long time. Ruth didn't speak. Outside, the crow in the oak tree had gone quiet. The creek was barely audible, just the cabin settling around them, just the sound of the afternoon doing what afternoons do. He read the letter again, and then once more, not because he'd forgotten anything, because some things need to be read 3 times before they become real. I held you and you grabbed my fingers and I laughed out loud. He had been here, in this cabin, in these hands, loved by this man, before he could walk, before he could remember, before any of the loss and the silence and the garbage bags and the years of being told there was nobody. He had been loved before he even knew what that word meant. He was still on the floor when he heard the tires, not Ruth's truck, different engine, heavier, 2-car doors. Buddy, who had been lying in a patch of sun by the window, sat up, alert, watching the front of the cabin. Ethan got to his feet, went to the front window. Silver sedan, Vermont plates, engine cutting off at the end of the driveway. The driver's door opened. Dennis got out first. Suit jacket. That expression, the one that meant he'd already decided something. He stood beside the car and looked at the cabin the way you look at a property you've already started thinking of as yours. Then the passenger door, Miriam. She was wearing a dark coat, sunglasses even though the day was overcast. She stood beside the car and looked at the porch, at the carved trim on the doorframe, at the new railing post Ethan had braced the day before. She looked for just a moment like someone who had not expected the cabin to be beautiful. Then she put her expression back. Dennis walked up the path. Miriam followed. Ethan went outside, stood on the porch, didn't go down the steps. Dennis stopped at the bottom and looked up at him. "We need to talk about the property," Dennis said, "about the estate. There are legal questions that need to be addressed before any of this," he gestured at the cabin, "becomes official." Ethan looked at him. "You drove 5 hours," Ethan said. "We drove 5 hours because you disappeared. You didn't call. You didn't—" "I was asked to leave." Miriam flinched, small, barely visible, but there are real legal concerns here, Dennis said. George Calloway had a documented history of mental health issues related to his drinking. There's a question of whether he was competent when he made this will. My attorney, your attorney, has reviewed the documents and believes there are grounds. "Which documents?" Ethan said. "The ones in the court file or the sworn statement you signed in 2015. Dennis went still, very still. The kind of stillness that isn't calm, the kind that's the opposite of calm, held in place by effort. "What did you say?" Ethan went inside, came back with the sworn statement, walked down the porch steps and held it out. Dennis looked at it, didn't take it. "George was sober for 3 years when you signed this," Ethan said. "He had documentation, a letter from his doctor, his AA sponsor's written confirmation." He kept his voice level. "He didn't know how, but he did. You told a judge he showed up drunk and made threats. That never happened." Miriam was staring at the document. "Dennis," she said. He didn't answer her. "That's perjury," Ethan said, lying under oath to a family court judge. "Harlan Beck George's attorney has the full file, including this." He paused. "He's on his way here right now." Dennis's face went through several things quickly. None of them good. You're 17, he said. You don't understand how he was my grandfather. Ethan held the document steady. And you took the last 9 years we could have had, with a lie you signed your name to, in front of a judge. Silence. The wind moved through the oak tree. A branch somewhere creaked. Dennis looked at Miriam. Let's go, he said. Miriam didn't move. Miriam, I heard you. We're leaving. You're leaving, Miriam said. Go wait in the car. Dennis looked at her, at Ethan, at the document. He turned and walked back down the path, got in the silver sedan. The door didn't quite slam. Close, but not quite. The engine started and then stopped. He was waiting. Of course he was. Ethan looked at his mother. Miriam stood at the bottom of the porch steps, sunglasses hiding her eyes, hands clasped in front of her, her fingers gripping each other in the way they did when she was working to keep something in. He'd seen those hands his whole life. How did you know about the cabin? Ethan asked. Dennis found one of the return letters, years ago, before we were married. She paused. He looked into it, the property value, the land. Another pause. I didn't know he'd filed anything. Legally, I didn't know about. She stopped. The sworn statement. She pressed her lips together. No, she said. I didn't know about that. Ethan looked at her, believed her, unfortunately, because Miriam not knowing was somehow worse than Miriam knowing. Miriam not knowing meant Dennis had done that alone, made that decision alone, walked into a courtroom and lied under oath alone, for property he'd found out about in a return letter, while Miriam closed doors and didn't ask questions. Can I come up? Miriam asked. Ethan thought about it. Yes, he said. She climbed the steps, slowly, looked at the railing, the new post, ran her hand along the freshly sanded wood. You did this yesterday. She kept her hand on the railing, like she needed it to stay upright. He built all of this, she said. It wasn't quite a question. Every nail. She looked at the carved trim on the door frame, the leaves and branches cut into the wood by someone with 40 years of practice and 15 years of specific intention. Can I see inside? Ethan stepped aside. She walked through the cabin the way you walk through a place that makes you feel something you weren't expecting to feel, slowly, touching the walls, the shelves, the window frames. She stopped in the kitchen and put both hands flat on the counter and just stood there. She looked at the music box on the table, the open envelopes, the court documents spread on the floor. I found birthday cards, Ethan said, ages 6 through 14, in the walls. He paused. He wrote one every year. He sent them to the house and they came back. He kept them here instead. Miriam's hands tightened on the counter. He wrote you letters too, 15 years of letters. Ethan kept his voice even. He was getting good at that. You sent everyone back, but you read them first. She didn't deny it. What happened to the birthday money he sent? She said nothing. Mom, household expenses. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We needed it. It was mine. I know. He scraped that money together so I would have something, and you used it for household expenses. I know. She closed her eyes. I know, Ethan. He picked up the court petition from the floor, the one George had filed when Ethan was 6, the character references, the sobriety documentation, the judge's ruling stamped on the last page. The petition is denied. He held it out to her. She took it, read it. Her hands were shaking. She got to Dennis's sworn statement, read it twice, set the whole packet down on the counter very carefully. I didn't know about that, she said. I believe you. She looked at him, surprised by that, like she'd been prepared for something else entirely. He was a good man, Mom. Miriam pressed her hand over her eyes. He was a broken man who did his best, she said, and I was a broken woman who did her worst. A long silence. Buddy crossed the kitchen and sat beside Miriam. She looked down at him. He looked up at her. She reached down without quite deciding to and rested her hand on his head. He leaned into it. You need to tell me, Ethan said. Why? The real reason. She didn't answer immediately. She scratched behind Buddy's ears, slow circles, like she was buying herself time to find not just the right words, but the true ones. Every time I look at you, she said finally, I see Marcus. She paused. You have his face, his hands, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking, the way you go quiet when you're angry instead of yelling. Her voice cracked, held, and every letter George sent had Marcus's name in it, every single one, saying Marcus would want this. Marcus would be proud. Remember what Marcus always said. She pressed her fist against her mouth for a moment. I couldn't read his name without falling apart. Ethan waited. I was 25, she said. 25 years old with a 3-year-old and a dead husband and a father-in-law who showed up at my door drunk and pounding at midnight. Once, Ethan said. He did that once, and then he got sober. I know. 8 months later. I know that too. She looked at the floor. But by then, I had already decided. I had already built the walls, and it's very hard to take down a wall once you've decided it's necessary. She paused. It got easier over time to say he was dead, to say there was no one, because if he was dead, I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to feel anything about it. I could just not. Ethan looked at his mother, this woman who had stood at a kitchen sink washing a clean mug, this woman who had folded and refolded a dish towel because she needed something to do with her hands while she told her son it was time to go. She was not a villain. He'd spent weeks being angry at a villain, and she wasn't one. She was just someone who had been handed more pain than she knew what to do with and had made the worst possible choice with it. He understood that. He didn't forgive it. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But he understood it. You could have let me have one person, he said. One person who actually wanted me. Miriam's face crumpled. She pressed both hands over her eyes and her shoulders shook. Not loudly, not dramatically. The quiet, ugly way of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally run out of the strength to hold it. I know, she said. I know. Outside, the silver sedan's engine was still running, waiting. Ethan went to the kitchen and poured a cup of coffee, came back, set it on the table beside Miriam. She looked at it, looked at him, didn't say thank you, just picked it up with both hands and held it, which was maybe the most honest thing she'd done since she arrived. A truck on the gravel road, Harlan Beck's. He parked behind the silver sedan and walked up the path with a leather briefcase and the measured stride of a man who has been practicing law for 30 years and is not easily rattled. He shook Ethan's hand, looked at the documents spread on the porch table where Ethan had moved them, looked at the sworn statement. I see, Harlan said. He set his briefcase down, opened it, pulled out a folder. I've reviewed the estate documents in full, he said. George Calloway was evaluated by his primary care physician 3 months before his death, documented as mentally competent. The will is valid. He looked at Ethan. The bonds are yours. The cabin is yours. The property taxes are paid through next January. George paid them in advance every year for the past 8 years. And the sworn statement, Ethan said. Harlan picked it up, read it the way lawyers read things, carefully, not quickly. This constitutes perjury, he said, filed before a family court judge, signed under penalty of law. He set it down. If you choose to pursue this, there are options available to you. Dennis's sedan was still idling at the end of the driveway. Ethan looked at it, thought about what it would mean to open that door, the legal process, the time, the cost, the years of a boy's life that were already gone and could not be given back no matter what happened in any courtroom. I'll think about it, he said. Harlan nodded. He walked down the path to the silver sedan, knocked on the window. Dennis lowered it. Harlan spoke for approximately 45 seconds. Dennis's face, visible through the windshield, went through the same several expressions as before, and one new one, fear, real, unguarded, the kind that appears when someone realizes The wall they've built is not as solid as they thought. The sedan backed up, turned around at the wide spot in the road, and drove away. Ethan watched it go. His mother was still on the porch, still holding the coffee cup. She hadn't gone with them. She'd come up in Dennis's car, and now she had no way back except to call for a ride, but she hadn't called yet. She was just sitting there, in George's chair, holding the coffee Ethan had made her. That meant something. He wasn't sure yet what it meant, but it meant something. Buddy came and sat beside Ethan at the top of the steps. The two of them watched the dust settle where the sedan had been. The road quiet again, the trees still, the creek doing its steady work somewhere out of sight. George had sat here every evening, every single evening. Rain, snow didn't matter. Waiting. She'll come. One day she'll come. He'd been right about the cabin. He'd been right about the walls. He'd even been right about the dog. Ethan looked down at Buddy. Buddy looked up at him, tail moving, certain. Part 3. He was waiting. Every single day. Miriam didn't leave. That was the thing. The silver sedan drove away, Dennis behind the wheel, the dust settling on the dirt road, and Miriam stayed on the porch with a coffee cup in both hands and nowhere particular to look. Ethan stood at the top of the steps and watched the road for a moment after the car disappeared. Then he turned around. His mother was still there, sitting in the wooden chair by the front door, the one George had built, the one worn smooth from years of one person sitting in it. She looked smaller in it than the chair looked, like the chair was used to holding someone larger, like it remembered a different shape. Buddy lay at her feet, head on his paws, watching her the way he watched things he'd decided needed watching. Ethan sat on the top step, didn't face her directly, just adjacent, close enough to talk, far enough to breathe. Neither of them said anything for a while. The afternoon was cooling down. The oak tree was doing its thing, leaves catching light, letting it go, catching it again. The creek was audible now, that steady sound, water over stone, patient and indifferent and constant. He sat here, Ethan said. What? George. Every evening. The mail carrier told me. Ethan looked at the road, said he waved every time, said one day he stopped and asked George what he was doing out here alone every night. He paused. George told him he was waiting. Miriam's hands tightened around the cup. He said she'll come. One day she'll come. Ethan looked at her. He said she, not he. Miriam closed her eyes. He thought you might be the one to find him, Ethan said. Not me. You. A long silence. I know, she said. I know that. The crow in the oak tree said something loud and opinionated and flew off somewhere. Buddy's ear twitched, but he didn't move. Miriam set the coffee cup down on the porch railing, very carefully, like setting it down wrong would break something. When I read his letters, she said, the ones I sent back. She stopped. Ethan waited. The first one I opened, I was 27. You were 4. I was standing in the kitchen of that apartment, the one on Birchwood, before Dennis and I read it, and She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. He wrote, Miriam, I am sober. I have been sober for 8 months. Please let me see my grandson. She stopped again, and I stood there and I thought, if I let him in, if I open this door, I will have to feel all of it again. I will have to sit across from this man who looks like Marcus and sounds like Marcus and remember every single thing I have been working so hard not to remember. She opened her eyes, looked at the trees. So I sealed it back up and stamped it and mailed it. Ethan looked at his hands. His father's hands, his grandfather's hands, 3 generations of men who built things when the world stopped making sense. You did that for 15 years, he said. Yes. That's a long time to be afraid. She didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. That was just the truth of it, sitting there between them. 15 years of a woman choosing the pain she knew over the pain she was afraid of, and a man in a cabin writing letters she'd read and mailed back month after month, year after year. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Miriam said. I know. I don't think I'd forgive me either. Not yet. She looked at her hands. Maybe not for a long time. Ethan didn't say it's okay. Didn't say I understand. Both of those would have been easy. Both of those would have been lies dressed up as kindness. What he said was, you can stay tonight. If you want, there's no bed, but the floor isn't bad. Miriam looked at him, like she hadn't expected that, like she'd braced herself for something else, and this had come from an unexpected direction, and she didn't quite know what to do with it. Okay, she said. Quiet? Yes, thank you. Buddy's tail moved once. Harlan Beck stayed for an hour. He sat at the small table by the fireplace with his briefcase open and went through everything. The bonds, the property documents, the court records, the sworn statement. He was methodical, unhurried, the way people are when they've spent 30 years dealing with difficult situations and have learned that rushing invariably makes them worse. The bonds are legitimate, he said. Serial numbers verified. All issued through the U.S. Treasury. In your name. They're yours as of George's death last October. He looked at the stack. Current value with accumulated interest. I'll need to do the full calculation, but George's estimate was conservative. Could be closer to $55,000. $55,000. Saved one bond at a time by a man who wore the same 3 flannel shirts for a decade. The property is clear, Harlan continued. No mortgage, no liens, taxes paid through January, title transfers to you cleanly. He looked at Ethan. You're 17. There are some procedural steps since you're a minor, but nothing that creates a real obstacle. George's instructions were thorough. He paused. They were always thorough. Every year when he came in, he'd go through everything, make sure nothing had lapsed, make sure there were no gaps. He looked at the window. He used to say, I want it to be simple when he gets here. I don't want him to have to fight for any of it. Ethan looked at the floor. He didn't want to fight for any of it, and he hadn't had to, because George had spent 15 years making sure of that. What about the sworn statement? Ethan said. Harlan set it on the table between them. Perjury is a serious matter, he said, signed under penalty of law, before a family court judge. He paused. If you chose to pursue it, there are grounds. A formal complaint with the court, potentially a referral to the district attorney. He looked at Ethan steadily. But that's your decision, not mine, not anyone else's. Ethan looked at the document. Dennis Howell's signature at the bottom. Neat, confident. The signature of a man who had never expected anyone to find the papers in the wall, who had never expected a 17-year-old to show up at a cabin in Vermont with a golden retriever and start pressing baseboards. I'll think about it, he said. Harlan nodded, closed his briefcase, stood. George was a good man, Harlan said. I want you to know that. I knew him for 12 years. He came into my office every January like clockwork, paid the taxes, updated the will, and every year same question. He picked up his briefcase. Is there any news about the boy? Ethan didn't say anything. Every year, Harlan said. Never missed, never stopped asking. He shook Ethan's hand and walked out. The door swung shut behind him, silent on its oiled hinges. That evening, Ethan made dinner. Pasta and butter and whatever Ruth had left in the paper bag. Not complicated, not impressive, but hot, which was the main thing. He made 2 bowls, carried them out to the porch. Miriam was still in the wooden chair. She'd been there most of the afternoon, not sleeping, not reading, just sitting with whatever she was sitting with. She took the bowl, looked at it for a moment. Thank you, she said. They ate. Buddy positioned himself between them with the professional neutrality of someone who has decided not to take sides, but intends to be available to both. Did he leave anything else? Miriam asked. Other than what you showed me, a letter. Ethan set his bowl down. In the hearth compartment, with the bonds. She waited. He went inside and came back with George's final letter, held it out. She took it, put her bowl on the railing, read it slowly, page by page, George's handwriting, the slower, more careful letters of a man near the end taking his time with each word. She got to the part about Marcus. Your father died because of my heart, because of my surgery, because of me. Her breath caught. She kept reading. I got sober because I made him a promise. He asked me to take care of you. That is the only promise I have left, and I intend to keep it even after I'm gone. She set the pages down in her lap, pressed both hands flat on top of them. He blamed himself, she said, every day, according to Ruth. So did I. She looked at the trees. Blame him for a long time. After Marcus died, she paused. It was easier to blame George than to blame the insurance company or the foreman or just the randomness of it. George was there. George was a person. Blame needs a face. She paused. But then I stopped blaming him and started just not thinking about him, and that became its own habit. Ethan picked his bowl back up. 8. He held you when you were born, Miriam said. Did you know that? He didn't. He drove 3 hours to the hospital, middle of the night. He was there before Marcus's shift partner. He held you in the delivery room. You grabbed his finger. She looked at Ethan's hands. He called me 2 weeks later, said it was the best moment of his life. She paused. That was the last time we spoke, until the letters started. Ethan set the bowl down again, looked at his own hands, imagined a 70-year-old man's hands, weathered, carpenter's hands, hands that had built 400 houses and knew exactly how much pressure each kind of wood could take, and a baby grabbing one finger and holding on. I laughed out loud, George had written, because you were so strong and so small and so completely yourself. He had been there. At the very beginning, he had been there. Miriam slept in the wooden chair that night. She said she was fine. She had come up in Dennis's car with no overnight bag because she hadn't planned to stay. So she sat in the chair with her coat pulled around her and she slept, or tried to. Ethan slept on the bedroom floor. Buddy, for the first time, chose to sleep in the living room. He settled near the wooden chair, near Miriam, not because anyone asked, just because she was there and alone, and that was enough reason for him. Ethan noticed it when he got up for water at 2 in the morning, his dog sleeping on the floor beside a woman who had made the wrong choices for 15 years, keeping her company anyway. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched them for a moment, then went back to bed. Morning. Miriam was up before him. He found her in the kitchen, standing at the window, looking at the oak tree with a cup of coffee she'd made herself. She'd figured out the coffee maker. She'd also figured out where Ruth had put the mugs. She was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. I should go, she said when she heard him. Okay. I need to get back. Work on Monday. Okay. She turned around, looked at him, really looked. The sunglasses were gone. Her eyes were tired and clear and slightly swollen at the edges. I mailed you something once, she said, when you were at that summer camp. Do you remember? Yeah, the letter. It was a bad letter. Practical things. Nothing real in it. She paused. I've been thinking about that letter since yesterday, about all the things I could have said and didn't. She set down the coffee cup. I have photographs at home, in the closet, baby pictures of you and Marcus, and some of George from before, from when Marcus was young. She paused. I should have given them to you a long time ago. I'll mail them. Ethan looked at her. Okay, he said. That's not enough. I know that's not. It's a start, he said. It's something. She nodded, looked at the floor, looked back up. He was right, she said. George, you do have Marcus's hands. Then she picked up her coat, walked through the cabin, slowly touching the wall as she went, one hand trailing along the smooth wood and out the front door. Ethan followed, stood on the porch. She called for a taxi from the nearest town, stood at the bottom of the steps while she waited, didn't say anything else. Neither did he. Buddy sat beside Ethan, both of them watching her. The car came 20 minutes later. She got in without looking back. The car went down the road, taillights disappearing around the bend through the trees. Ethan stood on the porch for a while after, not sad exactly, Not okay exactly. The feeling of a door that has been closed for a very long time, being opened just slightly. The hinge is stiff, the gap is small, but air is moving through it now, a thread of light. That was something. 2 days later, Harlan Beck filed the paperwork. 3 weeks after that, a letter arrived from Dennis Howell's attorney. Dennis was withdrawing the estate challenge. All of it. No further action would be taken regarding the property. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. Legal language. Technically polite. The kind of document that says everything except the thing it actually means, which was, we looked at the sworn statement and the documentation you have, and we are done here. Ethan read it, standing at the kitchen counter. Then he folded it and put it in the cedar-lined compartment behind the living room baseboard. Seemed right somehow. Let the walls hold that one too. 3 months later, the cabin had curtains, white cotton with a thin blue stripe. Ethan had bought the fabric at a shop in the next town, Millfield 12 miles east, and sewn them himself on a used machine Ruth had produced from somewhere in the back of her store, with the calm certainty of a woman who always has the right thing available at the right moment. The hems weren't perfect. The stitching wandered in 2 places, but they were his, and when the morning light came through them, it turned the living room the color of something warm. The porch was finished. Every board that needed replacing had been replaced. He'd stained the whole thing with a weatherproof finish he'd mixed at the hardware store. The posts were plumb. He'd checked them with George's level 3 separate times, which, okay, maybe that was excessive, but the level was satisfying to use. The bubble settling into center, the small confirmation that something was true, and George had clearly been a man who checked things 3 times. So, the garden was in. Back corner of the yard cleared out from weeds in February when the ground was still half frozen and Ethan had needed something physical to do with his hands. He'd turned the soil with a spade he'd found in the shed, planted in March. Tomatoes, green beans, butternut squash, 2 rows of lettuce that had come up faster than he expected and were now frankly out of control. Buddy patrolled the garden daily, did not eat the vegetables, did occasionally dig up a small area near the bean stakes for reasons known only to himself. When caught, he would look at Ethan with an expression that communicated both full awareness of what he had done and profound philosophical disagreement with the idea that this was a problem. They were working on it. Community college started in March. Millfield Community College, 18 miles east. Ethan drove the Ranger twice a week for his carpentry and design classes. Once a week for the shop session, a converted barn behind the main building where a retired contractor named Wendell ran an afternoon workshop for 12 students of various ages and skill levels. Wendell was 71, gray ponytail, hands that had built approximately 400 things over 50 years and looked exactly like it. He did not waste words. First week, he watched Ethan work for about 20 minutes. Then he said, "Stop." Ethan stopped. "You're thinking about the cut. Stop thinking about the cut. Feel the grain." Ethan looked at the piece of oak in front of him. "Feel the grain," Wendell said again. Less patiently, he tried, and something shifted, a small adjustment in pressure, the way his shoulder dropped, the way the tool moved with the wood instead of across it. "There," Wendell said, and walked away. Week 3, Wendell stopped beside him and watched for a while. "You don't fight it," he said. "What?" "The wood. Most beginners push. They decide what they want and they try to force it." He looked at Ethan's hands. "You listen first, then you go." He paused. "Where did you learn that?" Ethan thought about it. "I think it runs in the family," he said. Wendell made a sound that might have been approval, walked to the next workbench. Ethan stood there for a moment, looked at his hands, at the wood grain under them. "You have your father's hands, Ethan." He worked weekends at Ruth's store, stocking shelves, running the register, helping customers carry things to their trucks. Ruth paid him $12 an hour, let him eat lunch from the store, and occasionally offered unsolicited opinions on his carpentry projects, which he had learned after approximately 2 weeks to treat as the valuable resource they actually were. He knew the regulars now, knew who needed help with bags and who would be offended if offered, knew who wanted to talk and who wanted their groceries and their privacy, knew that the man who came in every Tuesday for exactly 1 can of soup and 1 loaf of bread was named Harold, had a cat named Patricia, and was always willing to discuss the weather at length if you gave him an opening. He liked the work. Not because it was glamorous, it wasn't even slightly glamorous, but because it was real, and because the people in it were real, and because Cloverfield, Vermont was starting to feel like a place he actually lived instead of a place he'd washed up in by accident. On a Saturday in early August, Ethan was behind the counter restocking the canned goods when the bell above the door rang. He didn't look up immediately. The bell rang often. But Buddy, who was allowed in the store on Saturdays because Ruth had at some point made a unilateral decision that this was acceptable and nobody had argued with her, stood up from his spot behind the counter. That got Ethan's attention. Buddy only stood up for specific reasons: food, squirrels, and people who needed something. Ethan looked up. A kid in the doorway, 15, maybe 16, hard to tell. Thin jacket for August, the wrong kind of thin jacket, the kind that says, "I don't have another one." Backpack over one shoulder, worn at the straps, where the stitching was starting to go. Hair that needed a cut. He stood just inside the door and looked at the store the way you look at a room when you're not sure you're welcome in it. Eyes moving, taking stock, finding the exits. Ethan recognized that look, had seen it in the rearview mirror of a Ford Ranger 4 months ago, at a rest stop off I-91, at a Walmart parking lot, at the public library with 11% battery and a job listing that required a fixed address he didn't have. The kid walked to the back of the store, stood in front of the sandwich cooler, looked at the prices, looked at the cash in his hand, counted it, put it back in his pocket, turned to leave. "Hey," Ethan said. The kid stopped. "You want a sandwich?" "I don't have enough." "I didn't ask if you had enough." A pause. The kid looked at him, 17-year-old behind the counter, golden retriever watching with alert, interested eyes. "I asked if you want one," Ethan said. Another pause. "Yeah," the kid said. Ethan came around the counter and opened the cooler, pulled out a turkey sandwich and a bottle of water, brought them to the counter, rang them up under his own account, pushed them across. The kid picked them up, held them like they might be temporary. "You can sit," Ethan said. He pulled the wooden stool from behind the counter, put it near the window. "Take your time. Nobody's counting." The kid sat, unwrapped the sandwich, ate it slowly, carefully, the way you eat when you're not sure when the next one will be and you want to make this one last. Ethan went back to the canned goods. Didn't ask where he was from, didn't ask where he was going, didn't ask if he was okay. Because those questions asked too fast by the wrong person at the wrong moment make people smaller, make them feel observed instead of seen, make them want to leave instead of stay. He just let him eat. Ruth came out of the back room, saw the kid on the stool, saw Ethan at the shelves, didn't say a word, just went back to her ledger. When the kid finished, he stood up, folded the wrapper, put it in the trash, walked to the counter. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." Ethan tore a page from the notepad by the register, wrote down his number. "If you need anything," he said, "call. My name's Ethan. I'm here most weekends." The kid looked at the paper, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked out. Ethan watched through the window as the kid crossed the parking lot. The way he walked, head slightly down, shoulders carrying something invisible but heavy, moving like he'd already gotten used to moving alone. Ruth came to stand beside him. George would have done the same thing, she said. Ethan watched until the kid turned the corner and was gone. "I know," he said. He called Miriam that evening. He called every week now, had started about a month after she left. Not because he'd decided to exactly, more because one Sunday afternoon he'd picked up the phone and dialed, and she'd answered on the second ring, and they'd talked for 12 minutes about nothing in particular, and at the end of it, he'd felt not fixed, not resolved, but slightly less like something was missing. So he called again the next week, and the week after that. "How's the garden?" she asked. "Tomatoes are coming in. Beans too. The lettuce situation has gotten out of hand." "Your father grew tomatoes. Did I ever tell you that?" "No. When we first got married, he had a little plot behind the apartment. Tomatoes and basil and one pepper plant that never did anything." She paused. "He was very proud of that pepper plant, despite all evidence." Ethan almost laughed. Not quite, but close. Closer than he would have expected. "I mailed you something," Miriam said. "You should get it Monday." "What is it?" "Photographs. Baby pictures. Some of you, some of your father. And," she stopped, "there are some of George, from when Marcus was young. I had them in a box in the closet." A pause that had weight in it. "I should have given them to you a long time ago." Ethan looked at the oak tree through the kitchen window. The evening light in the leaves, the same light George had looked at probably most evenings. The same tree, the same creek, the same strip of road visible through the gap in the trees. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome, sweetheart." They hung up. He sat with that word for a moment. Sweetheart. She hadn't called him that in years. He hadn't noticed until now, hadn't noticed its absence, hadn't known he was missing it until it came back. Buddy pressed against his leg. "Good day," Ethan told him. Buddy's tail moved. Agreement. The box arrived Monday. He opened it on the porch because he wanted to be outside when he saw them. Photographs. Dozens of them. Loose in the box, some in paper envelopes labeled in Miriam's handwriting. Ethan newborn, a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket, impossibly small, eyes closed, fists clenched beside one cheek, the face of someone who has just arrived and is still figuring out what arriving means. Marcus and Ethan first week, his father on a couch, not looking at the camera, looking at the baby on his chest. That face, the careful smile from the dashboard photograph, but unguarded here, entirely unguarded, just happy, specifically, quietly, completely happy. The happiness of someone who can't believe this is real and has decided to believe it anyway. George with Ethan, an older man in a flannel shirt, sitting in a hospital chair, holding a baby in the crook of his arm, looking down. Ethan looked at that photograph for a long time, because in it was a face he'd never seen in person, a face he knew now from letters and music boxes and carved door frames and a 15-year cabin and a mail carrier's stories about evenings on a porch and a lawyer who asked the same question every January. George Calloway at 60 years old holding his 3-day-old grandson. He had his jaw, his eyebrows, the line of his cheekbones. He looked like him. Not a little, a lot. The way you sometimes look at a photograph of a stranger and think there's something familiar there, and then you realize it's because you've been seeing that face in the mirror every morning of your life and never knew whose face it was. He sat on the porch step with the photograph in both hands, 3 days old, already held by this man, already loved by this man, already the center of a promise this man would spend the rest of his life keeping. He hadn't known any of it, and now he knew all of it. He went through every photograph, read the dates on the backs, 3 years of a family he barely remembered, 3 years before the scaffold, before the letters, before the long silence that had shaped everything. He kept every one of them. He built the bookshelf in late September. The alcove beside the fireplace had been empty since he moved in. He'd been thinking about it for weeks, measuring it with his eye, figuring the dimensions, working out the joinery in his head during the drive to community college and the quiet hours before sleep. He'd brought it up in Wendell's shop session, and Wendell had said, "Draw it first." So he drew it. Wendell looked at it, made one correction to the shelf spacing, said, "Now build it." He sourced the lumber from the hardware store. Oak, because George had used oak throughout the cabin, and it seemed right to continue the conversation, to let his work speak to George's work across the same material. It took him 3 weekends. The joints weren't invisible the way George's were. Not yet. They were tight. They held. But there was still daylight in them if you look close, the gap where skill was still becoming, where a 17-year-old who had been doing this for 7 months met the ghost of a man who had done it for 40 years. He put it in the alcove, stood back, checked it with the level, plumb, level, square. He let out a slow breath, then he filled it. The photographs went on the top shelf, framed simple frames he'd made in Wendell's shop from leftover oak, his father in the garden, George in the delivery room, Ethan in the yellow blanket. The music box went in the center. He wound it and let it play while he arranged the rest of the shelf. The tune moved through the cabin slow and gentle and slightly uneven in the way that handmade things are uneven, not imperfect, just human, the sound of something made by someone who was not a musician but who needed very badly to make something beautiful. Books on the lower shelves, and George's journals. He'd found 4 of them all together, tucked in various places over the months of living here. Carpenter's journals, dry records of work and weather and decisions about joinery. But between the technical entries, sometimes a single sentence that had slipped through Ethan would be 9 today. Wonder if he likes school. Hope he has a dog. He put the journals in order by year. 2009 to 2024. 15 years of a man's life on a shelf his grandson had built. He stood back and looked at it for a long time. The joints weren't invisible. The surface wasn't as glassy as George's work. But it was his first full piece, his first real thing, and it was in George's house, in George's alcove, holding George's photographs and George's music box and George's words. On an evening in late October, almost exactly 1 year after George had gone to the hospital for the last time, Ethan sat on the porch. The rocking chair was new, secondhand, bought from a family in town who was clearing out a house. Oak, worn smooth from years of use by someone he'd never know. It fit the porch like it had always been there, like George had left that spot open on purpose. Maybe he had. The sky was doing the thing it does in Vermont, in autumn colors that don't seem real. Orange above the tree line, pink at the edges, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's being lit from inside, like the world has a warmth it's been saving for exactly this moment. Buddy was on the top step, nose up, reading the air with his usual professional thoroughness. A leaf blew across the yard, and he tracked it with his eyes but did not pursue it. Mature, dignified. Then he chased it, caught it, looked at it, let it go, came back and sat on the step like nothing had happened, resumed his dignified expression. Ethan said nothing about this. Some things are between a dog and his conscience. Ethan rocked slowly. The year had changed him in ways he was still discovering. He was taller maybe, or just carried himself differently. His hands knew things now that they hadn't known before, the feel of grain, the give of a mortise joint when the fit is right, the satisfying click of a drawer sliding perfectly home. He had friends, or the beginning of friends. A woman in his Thursday carpentry class who was 63 and learning woodworking for the first time because she said her husband had always done it and she was tired of not knowing how. Harold from Tuesday soup and bread runs, who had expanded their weather discussions into territory, including local history, bird identification, and the correct way to stack firewood. Ruth, who was something more than a friend and had no clean category. He had a place, a real one, not a borrowed life or a house he was staying in until asked to leave. A place where the walls remembered things, and the hinges were oiled and the level said true. He looked at the road, the same road the mail carrier drove 6 days a week, the same road Ruth's truck came up every few days, the same road Miriam had come up in a silver sedan, and the same road she'd left on and the same road she called from every Sunday now to talk about tomatoes and photographs and the slow, difficult work of two people learning to be honest with each other. The same road George had watched every evening for 12 years. She'll come. One day she'll come. He'd been waiting for Miriam, hoping she'd be the one to break first, to open a door. She hadn't, but Ethan had come instead, not knowing, not planning, not because he'd figured anything out, just because a lawyer had called at a rest stop, just because there'd been $47 and nowhere else to go. And it turned out that sometimes arriving by accident is the same as arriving on purpose. The cabin doesn't ask how you found it. The walls don't ask what took you so long. They just open. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the final letter, not George's letter to him, the other one, the one he'd saved for last reading it only occasionally on evenings like this one when the light was going gold and the creek was audible and the cabin was warm at his back. George's letter to Marcus, written the night before the hospital, addressed to a man who had been gone for 14 years, never sent because there was no one to send it to, kept in the wall instead, the way George kept everything safe in the dark, waiting for the right moment. He unfolded it carefully. Marcus, I should have said no louder. I should have gotten on my knees and begged you not to go up on that scaffold. I've carried your death every single day for 14 years, and I will carry it until I'm gone. I know now that carrying it was the wrong response. I know now that the right response was to do exactly what I promised you, to take care of your boy, to make sure he knew. I built the cabin because I promised you I would take care of him. I don't know if I kept that promise. I hope I did. I hope he finds his way here. I hope he's strong like you. I hope he has your stubbornness and your laugh and the thing you had where you could find the funny thing in any situation. I hope the world has been kind to him in ways the world was not always kind to you. I love you, son. I always will. I'm sorry I couldn't say no loud enough. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you the way you protected me. I'm sorry for so many things, but I am not sorry for the years we had. I am not sorry for one single day of them. Tell Marcus his boy made it. If you see him somewhere, tell him his boy found the cabin and found the walls and found everything. Tell him the boy has his hands. Your father, George. Ethan read it through once, then folded it back along its creases and held it in his lap. George hadn't only built the cabin for Ethan. He'd built it to keep a promise to Marcus. Two purposes woven together the way a good joint is woven stronger, for the complexity holding in two directions at once. And Ethan, by finding his way here, by showing up at a rest stop with $47 and a dog and a willingness to answer a phone from a number he didn't recognize, had made both purposes whole. He got up, went inside, placed the letter on the bookshelf beside the music box between the journal from 2009 and the journal from 2010, where it belonged, where George's words could sit alongside George's other words, and everything could be in one place. He wound the music box, let it play, came back outside, sat in the rocking chair. Buddy arranged himself at Ethan's feet with a long sigh of contentment, the sound of a dog who has assessed his situation and found it satisfactory in all respects. The sky was going purple at the edges now. The oak tree was a dark shape against it, enormous and patient. The creek was steady, the same creek, the same sound, the sound George had heard every evening from this chair watching this road. Ethan rocked. The music box played inside, faintly audible through the open door. The lullaby a carpenter had made for a grandson he couldn't reach, played now in the cabin where the grandson finally lived. The notes a little uneven, a little slow, human, handmade, real, because some love doesn't travel through the mail. Some love gets built in, board by board, year by year, compartment by compartment, hidden in the walls of a house a man spent 15 years making ready, waiting for the day someone who needed it would find their way here. Ethan had found his way here. The walls had opened, and everything that had been hidden in them, every card, every letter, every folded bill, every savings bond, every hand-carved note, every oiled hinge and fitted joint and smooth surface, all of it had been waiting, not for just anyone, for him, for exactly him. He sat on the porch of the cabin his grandfather had built in the chair that fit the space like it had always been meant to be there, listening to a lullaby drifting through the open door, and watched the last light leave the sky over Cloverfield, Vermont. The creek ran, the oak tree stood, the road curved away through the trees, the same road that had brought him here, the same road George had watched for 12 years, with the patient certainty of a man who understood that love, if it's real enough and built well enough, will eventually find its way home. George had been right. He always had been.